Okay, welcome back, everyone. We good 10-minute break was adequate. Uh, to continue our engaging presentation, just an admin remark that this will be an interactive session, so you will be assigned to a breakout session. You'll receive the pop-up of do you want to join? So if you are multitasking, we just ask that you either try to pause that so you can be a fully present participant, and the more you put in, the more you'll get out. So we'll turn it over to our Vice President of Communications that you hear from on a weekly basis, uh, Karen, and to introduce our speaker.
Good morning, everyone. I'm sure you all remember Kate Vendemio from our October event in Silver Spring, and she was such a hit, and we're so happy that she's back. She is the CEO and founder of Mount Vernon Consulting. I checked out her website this morning, and I encourage you to do the same. Some great information on there about getting to know your customers, her experience as a management consultant, instructional designer and trainer, and being focused on learners before content. She also has some great book recommendations on her website, and her thoughts on transparency and authenticity. And I'm really fascinated with her goal to visit the home country of her ancestors in all 50 states. And that sounds like a great future talk. So I will turn it over to Kate.
Thank you so much, Karen. I really appreciate it. And I will say, about earlier this month, I guess it's still July, just got back from, we did a multi-state trek in my quest to visit all 50 states. And so we went to Grand Tetons National Park and then Yellowstone National Park, and then drove up to Glacier National Park and then went through Idaho, stayed in Idaho for a few days, and flew out of Spokane, Washington. So with that, I am now at 47 states. So if anyone has any projects in Hawaii, Alaska, or Oregon, I would greatly appreciate if you'd let me know because I have to accomplish my goal. But with that being said, it was absolutely just amazing to experience that part of the country and to see just the absolute beauty of that that part of the country. It was just absolutely fantastic. But I'm here today now to talk to you about conflict. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And then I'm gonna have on my other screen is where I have the chat and whatnot. So if there is something big going on in the chat, I'll look over periodically. So if you just see me looking, that's what I'm trying to do. But we're here today to talk about cracking the code of conflict. And really, this is how leaders can pivot. I know your theme is about pivoting pivoting for your purpose. And if nothing else, we all need to be working on pivoting. There is a lot of change that's going on, particularly for those of us in the Washington, D.C. area. Some of our industries that have traditionally been very stable are suddenly being threatened. There are funding cuts, there are people cuts, there are resource cuts. And so we're having to be flexible and nimble. But when that type of change happens, that can often lead to conflict. So we're going to be here for the next hour and a half together. I do encourage you to participate when you can. I recognize that many of you are truthfully multitasking, and I'd love to think every one of you is giving me 100% of your attention. But I do encourage you to please pay attention and participate in this because, as Matt said, you'll get out of it what you put into it. We're here today to really talk about conflict recognition. We're not here to have conflict resolution. We're trying here in this presentation is to learn about recognizing those signs of conflict and recognizing the innate behaviors that people have. So we've all seen the traditional or what we might think of as a big conflict in the workplace. Someone's maybe yelling at someone, the voices are raised, there's hands flailing, right? We've seen some of these big conflicts. I used to work with a person who threw chairs. That was way back in the day. I was never on the receiving end, but we all knew to avoid him, right? Those are those big blow up conflicts that people have. We're here today to really talk about those subtle forms of conflict, how people act when they're in conflict, what's obvious and what's under the surface, and how do we modify and adapt our behavior accordingly. And I can tell you, one of the most valuable lessons I have learned through the years, and I work in leadership development, but it is that you cannot change other people. You can change yourself. You can change how you react to something. But fundamentally, people's core behaviors, their core reactions to things is not always something that you can control or you can change. You can have influence over it. You can give feedback on it. You can give guidance on it. But the only thing that you really have control over is how you react to the situation. So with that in mind, we are going to dive in. All right. So conflict, like I had started off saying this, conflict isn't always loud, right? It's not people yelling and screaming at each other. It's not honking of the horns if you're in the car. And it's more of oftentimes it can be quite subtle. Conflict is in some of those nonverbal communications that we have. The eye roll when someone's talking and we're behind them and we roll our eyes. It's the heavy sigh. It's the sitting with our arms crossed. It's the aggressively shutting your laptop and announcing that you're leaving for the day, right? So conflict isn't always overt. It can be very subtle. And we want to pay attention to that as project managers. We want to make sure that we're aware of the different types of conflict that's going on in our workplace. And so we see here this unresolved conflict doesn't disappear, it actually lingers. So I want you to think for a moment about some of the conflicts that you might be dealing with within your organization. And don't tell me that you don't have any conflict, because I don't believe it. It's just like when married couples say they never fight. Well, then there's something going on there why you're not communicating with each other. All right, so think about some type of conflict that you might be experiencing. Maybe something that you've had in the past. Think about the impact it had on you and how it lingers. I used to work with a person who we were like oil and vinegar. We just had very different approaches to things. At the end of the day, we were both very dedicated to ensuring that our client had the product that they needed. But the two of us clashed a lot. And because of her work style and my work style, I ended up, again, I couldn't change her, so I would modify my behavior. But at times I felt like I was a wounded puppy, right? I felt like I had been chastised or corrected one too many times. And so when I was around her, I felt like I was on my tippy toes. I wanted to always be very cautious, to not upset her. It was something that lingered, and it was sort of that unspoken heaviness in the air when we were with each other because it lingered and there were some resentments and there was some past that was brewing underneath the surface. And it was always present when the two of us were working on projects together, as much as we tried to resolve it and move past it. Conflict that doesn't get resolved, it doesn't disappear. It's going to continue to linger. Let's talk about this in terms of the impact it has on you as a project manager and as a leader. Conflict is constant in the workplace. Whoops. So we see that 85%, that's the percentage of employees who experience work conflict in the United States. I actually would argue that it's higher, but that's what the data tells us, that 85% of employees are experiencing that. 67% of employees ruminate about workplace conflict outside of work hours. I don't know about you all, but if I have a conflict or a run-in or there's some behavioral challenges, I find myself really reflecting on it and ruminating on it. It also could be because this is my field. But, what we're seeing is people are spending a lot of their time and energy trying to process that conflict, think it through, stew on it, and then that's where some of that resentment lingers. And we find that 2.8 hours per week is dedicated towards employees dealing with conflict situations in the United States. And that ends up equaling over $3 billion of lost productivity a year in the United States, all over conflict. Conflict is constant, conflict is always present. Conflict is also not bad. What we're talking about here is recognizing how people react to different types of conflict situations. All right, so we have a poll here. So tell me, Matt, are we able to pull it up or do you want me to just ask the group?
If you could just ask the group this one, but I should have it figured out by the time we do another one.
Review.
Yeah.
Sure, that's fine. All right. Which of these causes the most friction on your projects? So I don't want you to think about it. You can just type it in the chat. What causes the most friction on the projects that you're on? Is it frequent changes in project scope? Is it personality clashes? Is it lack of accountability for task ownership? Miscommunication across department or roles? Frequent changes in direction or scope? So those are some of the different ideas. So I'd love for you to just, again, type it into the chat. What are some of the causes of the friction on your projects? So some ideas: frequent change in project scope, personality clashes, miscommunication, lack of accountability, frequent changes in scope, or there could be some other things. So go ahead. Oh, look at this. I'm seeing 22 responses. I love it. All right, we're seeing personality, communications, lack of ownership, personality, lack of accountability, personality, miscommunication and personality, communication, personality. All right, I'm seeing a little bit of a trend here. Lack of responsibility, frequent changes in direction, involved. Okay. Lack of accountability. All right. So, there's all kinds of different things that contribute to why we have conflict in the workplace, but we're finding that a lot of it has to do with things like personality. All right. So let's go here to the next one. So think about, again, we just kind of talked about where has there been conflict? Where has it derailed your work? Where has it really impacted you? So let's think about it again in terms of where you have a lot of the friction on your team and where there is conflict. What I'm seeing here is that a lot of what you are saying, not everything, but most of you are saying that it has to do with more of the people side of things. And so we find that there's really two different types of conflict, particularly with project managers. There's our technical causes, right? All of a sudden we have scope creep that perhaps funding got cut, or you have a personnel change, right? Or a system improvement, or a system is broken down. And then we also have our human causes, and that's where most of our conflict happens. What we often find is that our technical issues, we put a lot of time and energy and resources into fixing those, preserving those, improving those. We don't put that same type of time and energy into addressing the human causes of where the conflict happens. Why do you think that is? Go ahead and type that in the chat, or you can unmute yourself if you'd like. Why do we have a tendency to put our time and energy into fixing those technical causes, but not always addressing the human causes of conflict? All right. So I'm seeing here. Technical can be more straightforward. It's uncomfortable to talk about the roles. You might feel bossy. Technical is easier. People are hard. People can't be fixed. Humans want to change. Technical is easier. Politics, uncomfortable. Right. So it's natural for us to want to default to what's easier. And as project managers, we got a lot that we have to balance. And so it's easy for us to say, you know what, let me fix some of those technical challenges because that's creating the problems. But oftentimes it's the people behind it that are actually creating even more of the issues. Let's think about this in the context of AI. Now, I know that in the October session that I spoke at with the PMI group, the theme was around AI. And I've been giving it so much thought since then, and it's just constantly evolving, right? It's like the Wild West out there of AI. But we think about, oh my gosh, AI is so fantastic. It's going to do things like improve our systems. It's going to make us work more efficiently together. It's going to make us that we can replace humans, right? And there is definitely credence to that. There are ways that we are going to be able to use those AI systems to help improve us. But the fact of the matter is that AI doesn't get offended, but humans do. So until we have moved into the George Jetson world where everyone is flying around on saucers and AI has taken the place of all humans, we're going to have to deal with humans. There is a human component to any of the type of work that we do. And it's frustrating and it's challenging. And the more efficient we get when we're using AI, the more we have the time to put towards managing the human side of the challenges. So, let me just pause here for a moment while you reflect on that and see some of the comments I see here in the chat. Oh, okay. So we're still talking about the human and the technical side of things. Absolutely. So again, it's easy for us to say, oh, well, so and so is just a difficult person. Well, let's work around them. Maybe we'll come up with a hack, or we'll do a separate Slack channel, or we'll whatever we can do, right? It's a lot easier to put our time and energy into that rather than addressing the human side of where the challenges are. All right, so we're going to talk about the 4 common conflict behaviors. But before we do that, I'm actually going to just share with you a quick story. So I have been working with a client for a while now, really gotten to know them and their team. And this is a Fortune 500 company. They're in manufacturing. There's a lot of pressure to be innovative and to create new innovative things, right? Talk about this intersection of technical and AI and right. So there's a huge amount of pressure. These are very, very intelligent engineers who are very dedicated to the mission of the organization. And they are working on developing this tiny little chip. And I am not enough of a technical expert to give any more details than that, but I just know it's this tiny little chip and it's innovative and it's the first of its kind. And they're prototyping it and they're trying to make it so that it will improve the rest of their systems. So lots of pressure on this group. And when I was originally meeting with them, the director said, we actually get along really well. There's not a lot of conflict. We just are having a hard time getting over that hump of being innovative, right? I want people to feel more inspired. I want them to feel like it's a safer place for them to be creative. But it's fine, it's strange because we don't have a lot of conflict though, so I'm not sure what's going on. So I said, okay, well, let me kind of observe. And so I started to observe the teams and how they were working and interacting with each other. So within this large team, there were several sub teams. And so then we got together for a workshop and broke them all up into smaller groups, teams of about, I think, 6 people. And so we had several subgroups and they had to do this team building activity, not some cheesy trust fall thing. They had to work together to basically come up with a creative solution for something. So I gave everyone the instructions. It's all up on the screen. I said, work together with your team and you're going to come up with this creative solution. And about 10 minutes into what was supposed to be a probably 40-minute activity, one guy on the team raises his hand. He says, we're done. And I said, okay. And he says, we're done. Like, we're done. We finished it. We're done. We won. And I said, what do you mean you won? And he says, we won. We got it done first. We're done and we won. And he wanted everyone in that group to know that his team had completed it first. And so then all of a sudden, everyone else is sort of stopping and looking. And I had a couple teams that hadn't even started to build this creative activity we were doing. And here's one group that's boasting about the fact that they were done. And so I gave them some more time to finish, the rest of the groups to finish, and then we had a debrief. And I said to them, what was going on with the announcement that you were done? And the guy said, well, we were done, and I wanted you all to know. And I said, where in the instructions did it say that this was a competition? Where did it say that you had to be the first one done? And that unveiled this entirely deep conversation. And it turns out that this particular person is the type of person who likes to get things done. He will barrel through and make sure that he pushes others aside so that he can win and that he can get things done. And then he wants everyone to know about it. So I asked the rest of the people working on this little team project with him, I said, how did that feel? And the one person said, well, I really wanted a chance to talk through our different approaches. And I wanted to hear everyone's different perspectives on it. But his name, let's call him Richard, right? So they said, but Richard didn't give us a chance to fully hear everyone's insights. And then the next person spoke up and they said, I actually had a really good idea, but I didn't even say it because I didn't want to rock the boat because Richard knew where he was going. And so I thought, you know what, even though I kind of am a technical expert in this field, I'm not going to say anything because I don't, Richard's, he's got his vision. And then the other person, I said, how did you feel? And he said, I was kind of in my own head. I was sitting there, I was thinking, I was developing the plans in my head. I needed some time to process it. And by the time I sort of resurfaced and was able to talk to the team, Richard had already taken us down a path. And that, ladies and gentlemen, really describes the different ways that groups handle conflict and how different people handle conflict. And I promise you, this is actually a real live case study. I could not have framed it more perfectly. And we had such an interesting conversation from there as a group, because this is a group that told me they didn't have conflict, right? This is a group that said, nope, we all get along really well. We just can't be innovative. But guess what? They did have conflict. It wasn't the loud, in your face, all kinds of frustration and tension that was obvious. Instead, we had people that were reacting in different ways to different personalities, and they defaulted to what their behavior preference is. So let's go into what that means. All right, there's 4 common conflict behaviors. So we see here we got the first one, which is our direct and outcome focus. That is Richard. He was on a mission. He wanted to complete this task. He wanted to get it done, and that was the top priority. We have other people who are energetic and expressive. They want to talk it through. They want to make sure that everyone has a chance to have a say in it, and before they move forward, and they've got all this enthusiasm. They want to encourage people. They're our cheerleaders of the group. Then we've got our calm, steady, and diplomatic. In this example, this was the person who said, I had some ideas, but I didn't want to rock the boat. And so I just let Richard move forward. And then we have our analytical and precise. And in this example, that was the person who was thinking through all the plans in their head needed a little bit of time to process it. And by the time he sort of came back to the surface of where everyone else was, our detailed and outcome focused person was already 5 steps ahead. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about what this looks like. All right, so again, let's go into, I'm not going to go into a huge amount of lecture here, but I want to just give us a little bit of overview here. So our direct and outcome focused people, they can have a tendency to assert. They align with that, let's get it done. These type of people, I want you to start thinking about who on your team is like this or who you work with. They can be very straightforward. They are absolutely open to debate. But when they are in conflict, they can come across as being insensitive, impatient, and it can turn into a win-lose situation. So in this example, Richard was very much displaying the impatience. He was looking at it as a win-lose situation. When people like Richard are in conflict, they have a tendency to focus on logic, victory, results, and then personal victory or victory. So personal and professional victory. Okay, so think about it again, who you're working with. When there is any type of conflict, these are the type of people who kind of dig their heels into the ground and they're going to argue their point and they're going to be very vocal about it. If you challenge them, they oftentimes will be happy to have a debate with you, but you better be ready to be on your toes and to be ready to come at them with all of your angles in a quick way. When they focus on things like logic and winning, that is what is a priority for this type of individual. All right, let's look at these energetic and expressive individuals. These people like to express themselves. They're typically more vocal. They can be kind of perceived as those cheerleader type where they're trying to encourage everyone to get along. They love to have all kinds of conversations and can sometimes go off on tangents. This can make our direct and outcome focused people very frustrated because they're not getting to the point. But our energetic and expressive individuals, they need to have the opportunity to talk things through. So when in conflict, they can be deeply empathetic. They want to make sure that everyone is feeling heard. They can also become emotional. They can bring emotions into the conversation. They say things like, I'm feeling, I'm thinking, I'm overwhelmed, I'm stressed. They can be talkative to the fault of talking over other people. And then sometimes they don't want to deal with the tension, so they'll just gloss right over it. And then if they get really stressed, they can start being a little nasty and making some personal attacks. When in conflict, this group of people, they focus on expression, feelings, and they want to maintain those relationships. So let's just look at these two in particular. Think about where there might be conflict between these two groups. So you got one person who is direct and outcome focused. You have another person who's very energetic and expressive. Where could you see opportunities for conflict between these two people if you had them on a team? Go ahead and put it in the chat or you can unmute yourself. All right, we're seeing one focuses on facts and one focuses on feelings. When you say I feel, okay. When their energy delays the outcome, logic versus feelings. Okay. We need to have a balance of logic and feelings. Okay. Richard was so focused in this situation on completing the task for this mock scenario in a training that he just became impatient. He went right past what everyone was saying. In the meantime, our expressive people are the ones that are trying to make sure that, okay, oh my gosh, I haven't worked with you before. So nice to meet you. What's your name? Let's talk this through a little bit. Richard's already on like step 4, right? And our expressive person has developed a relationship with who else is in the group. And then when they start to feel a little stressed, they haven't had that space to express their feelings, then they can start to be really frustrated. Um, Okay, whoever you focus solely on in one aspect, facts or feelings, to the exclusion other is a recipe for disaster. Mary, I'm not by any way advocating that you focus on one over the other. What I am saying is that it is generally people have a tendency to fall into one of the 4 categories when there is conflict. So again, and sometimes there can be an overlap between the 2 different groups. So this is just more of an awareness of how different people react during conflicts. Might have better ideas. Maybe that's how to talk with Richard. Okay. All right. So great comments in the chat. What I'm going to do is move on to the other 2. All right. We've got our calm, steady, and diplomatic group. And this is the group that really thrives on harmony. They want to make sure that everyone is feeling heard. They are oftentimes the more quiet one in a group, but they're observing. They're observing. They're the type of people who don't talk at all during a meeting, and then all of a sudden they pipe up and they have the most insightful thing to say. In this group, when in conflict, one of the things that they're great about is being able to communicate tactfully. So while our first 2 that we referenced might be bickering and fighting and talking through feelings versus logic, this person or this group, the harmony group, can sort of come in and say, I'm noticing this, or let's do this, or have we thought about this, right? They're kind of calm and steady. But when there is conflict, they can withdraw. So in the situation that I told you about, this example, the one employee said, I had some ideas, but Richard started moving forward with it. And so it wasn't worth it for me to pipe in, right? They can sometimes give in to appease other people rather than expressing what their own thoughts or feelings are. What they can also do is sometimes let those issues simmer under the surface, and that's where some of that unspoken tension can really happen. When in conflict, this group of people have a tendency to focus on the feelings, but they also want consensus. They want people in the group to feel comfortable with the plan before moving forward. Think about, as a project manager, what role you play in this, and you probably flex based on the needs of the rest of your group. But if you have a person who wants to just move forward, get it done, figure out the plan maybe as they're coming along, but then you have someone else on the team like this who wants consensus, wants to make sure everyone's thoughts and feelings are heard, that can be a lot of dynamics that you're dealing with. And then the final one is our analytical and precise group. And they also like to defend. This is what we call it. This is our group of people who like logic and they like information and data. They like to have the information in front of them, spend a little bit of time thinking about it before they jump to making a decision. They get uncomfortable making those super quick decisions, especially feelings that are, going with your gut feeling. They like to have that information. When in conflict, they want to dive into what's the root cause of it. What's causing this problem in the first place? We are having a production delay. What is the cause of it? How are we going to fix it? They can get defensive when they're in conflict, and then they can oftentimes become either overly critical or they become passive aggressive. So it's not as obvious with these 2 on this page when they're feeling stressed or when they're having some conflict issues. It does a little bit of brimming beneath the surface. And then they can also end up overanalyzing situations, which then can cause stress. When in conflict, this group has a tendency to focus on justice and logic. Okay, so they're going to do more about defaulting back to data, defaulting back to core information. They don't go off of those gut feelings, and they need a little bit of time to process things. So going back to comparing these two, where could you see some conflicts between these two groups of people when you're working on a project together? Go ahead and put that in the chat or unmute yourself. All right, so again, where can we see some potential conflict between these two groups? Our calm, steady, and diplomatic, or our analytical and precise? Okay. Both have a tendency to have unresolved conflict, right? Okay, many of these can have, yeah, because they're avoiding the tension or they have self-isolated. The folks who isolate you lose their contributions and knowledge, right? Absolutely. We've got feelings versus logic, defensiveness. It's going to cause tension. They both seem to withdraw or isolate. Harmonized, overwhelmed leans into win-win, not listening to understand. Okay. So excellent, wonderful. Thank you all so much for your insight here. So I want to be really clear that of these four different types that we laid out, one is no better than the other. One is no worse than the other. What it is to make you aware. Again, like I said, the purpose of this is to talk about conflict recognition, not how to resolve conflict. Okay, these are some of these root, oh, sorry, hold on, most popular. I'm looking at some of these comments. Might be the best way to complete the project is when the CEO wants to get it done, even though they lack technical experience. All right, so absolutely. So again, not one is no better than the other. We all have some of these tendencies in us. But as we're going through this, I hope that this is helping to put a little bit of context around the people that you work with. There are people who will typically focus on the harmony. There will people who will defend their stances. There will people who are going to want to get it done. And there are people who are going to want to talk it through and make sure that everyone feels that they have had a chance to be represented. These are essentially the four different ways that we react to things. Let's think about also how some of our defend and then the person who asserts are actually very opposite of one another. Just like our feelings person and no, I'm sorry, hold on. Our harmonizing and our assert are very opposite of one another. And then our defending and then our feelings can also be opposite of one another. So when you have people like that on a team, you can start to see where there are some of these underlying tensions. Again, you're not going to necessarily see a big blow up, but what you will see is starting to see maybe some passive aggressive comments that are being made, or maybe a person's withdrawing from the team. Don't assume that they're quiet. Don't assume that they're not buying into it. Try and dig in and figure out what's going on. Where is there some of this source of the conflict, and what can you do to help address it? All right, so I see here in the chat that there have been some lots of different conversations. Someone had mentioned Myers-Briggs. And so this is indeed a framework. And so as part of the presentation, I did want to share with you, I have a free gift for you. And this is not a hard sales pitch at all. I'm just saying it's a free gift if you're interested. Because, oh, hold on, look at that. I teased a free gift, but I forgot that I have a poll for you first. All right, Matt, do we have the poll ready or do you want me to just ask the group?
You should see them on the tab. I posted both of them.
Okay, let me see here. Polls. Okay. All right, so actually it looks like we're gonna have two polls here. All right, so you should see them on the screen now. So we had kind of talked about what causes the most friction on your project. So you can go ahead and answer that again if you'd like. And then the second one is which of these feels most like your reaction to conflict? So take a look at those. Number two, which feels most like your reaction to conflict? You push harder, you get emotional, you shut down, or you tend to overthink. I'll give you a few minutes to respond to these. Oh, Sydney, you said you missed the second question. You might be able to scroll back down. I'm not sure. All right, we're seeing lots of responses come in. I'm going to give you about 10 more seconds. So please go ahead and fulfill your answers. All right, we're going to count down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, we're going to end that poll and I'll go ahead and share the results. Okay, so what we're seeing here is that which of these causes the most friction on your projects? We talked about this, but again, personality clash and the miscommunication across departments or scope is definitely on trend with what we saw in your responses. Now, which of these feels most like your reaction to conflict? Pretty evenly? Well, it looks like we've got a lot of I overthink and try and solve it logically, which kind of trends on point with project managers. Um, I'm seeing the pushing hard to get results, emotional, shut down, pretty evenly distributed. All right. And this is more just for your own self-awareness of how do you feel like you react during conflict. And think about then from there is where do you really how do you react and what impact does that have? So let's say that you're a project manager and you're in charge of an entire project, but your tendency is to overthink and try and solve things logically. You have to figure out a way to reconcile the need to get things done and move the project forward with your desire to have as much information as possible before making those decisions. So sometimes they can cause even some of our own internal conflict. All right, thank you all for sharing that. And thank you, Matt, for creating that poll. I appreciate it. All right, as I had mentioned, I have a teaser coming up for something free, but we have a couple more slides before I can really get you too excited about that. All right, so let's talk again about what's the real problem with our team conflict. And so as we were talking about this, you see, so what we can see is that sometimes there's silence. You can see it you can feel almost that heavy weight. And when we do things remote, it's not always as apparent, but you can still feel it. There's tension. And from that is people can say things, their tone, their body language can display where there's tension. That's why even if we are working in a remote environment, having video conferences, picking up the phone and talking to someone live is a much better way to gauge how people are thinking and feeling and reacting. And then we can start to see things like people missing deadlines. Missing deadlines is not because you don't care about a project. It could be because you think that people don't care about what you have to say. So start exploring some of those root causes for why this is happening. Because at the end of the day, this is very much like an iceberg, right? We have what you can see for people's behaviors, but what's really happening underneath the surface. Maybe they don't like conflict. Maybe they feel uncomfortable and they want to harmonize. Maybe they feel like they actually kind of have to control it or have a say in it. They could feel overwhelmed. Maybe it's a reputation risk. if we don't get this done, then it looks bad on me. Maybe they're feeling insecure. Maybe they're feeling that their thoughts or feelings are not being justified. So just because we see something and we start to see some of these behaviors, be aware that there's a lot going on under the surface. So I'm going to pause right here and see if anyone has any questions or thoughts before we move into the next sort of section. Okay, I see I get emotional, frustrated, and I overthink to try and push for a solution. I hear you, right? Is that we don't all neatly fit into one of these four categories, right? And it depends sometimes on the situation we're in. Again, if you are the top project manager who needs to make the big decisions to move a project forward, you might have to flex on what your natural tendencies are. This is about being aware of where your other team members are coming from. All right, any thoughts so far? Comments, reactions? I'm looking at the chat. All right, so I think I'm going to move on. And then again, if you have some additional thoughts or questions, you can feel free to put it in the chat. So as I had teased, there's something that I wanted to give away as a freebie for all of you who have been sitting with me for 46 minutes at this point. So for someone had referenced that this is similar to Myers-Briggs. A lot of this is based off of the context of everything DISC. So some of you might have taken DISC. It's a tool similar to Myers-Briggs, and it really has these four quadrants. So if you're thinking about it, you want to kind of look at it this way, is that our direct and outcome focused group aligns very much with the D, or the dominance in everything DISC. Our energetic and expressive group aligns with our I, or our influence within the DISC system. Our calm, steady, and diplomatic aligns very much with our steadiness component. And then analytical and precise aligns with the conscientiousness. So you can see here on this screen that, what the preferences are for each of these four categories, and then where they tend to default with logic and justice. And sorry, I'm looking at here. Catherine says, I feel there might be a market for effective conflict workshop. Thesis defense prep was incredible. So the way to do is better at work. Interesting. That's a good observation, or good comment. Okay, so some of you might be, again, you might be thinking, about, okay, here's the context for it, everything DISC. So one of the amazing things about taking the DISC assessment, at least through Wiley, which is the group I do it with, is that you're able to actually go online, and they have this program where if you and your team members take the everything DISC assessment, you can actually go onto their online platform and see how your preference compares to others. So for the engineering team that I had referenced, we actually did this where we had everyone take the everything DISC assessment. And when we did this breakout activity, they didn't know that we were, they knew that they had taken the assessment, but they didn't understand the context of it. And what's interesting is that we had purposely broken them out into groups where we had a mix of each of the four letters in each of the groups. And again, I could not have asked for a more perfect example of when Richard stepped in, and really, he was the dominant one in this group and really took the group in a direction where other people didn't necessarily have buy-in. All right, so, and again, what was helpful for this group is that they were able to actually go onto the Catalyst website once they took our assessment, and then they could see. So this is just an example of two different people, one person and then Rachel. So it talks about, Rachel is down in the S category. This person is up in the D category. So where they prioritize things, you can get some information on how they communicate with each other, how to manage conflict with one another, where your strengths lie, how to motivate them. So it's a lot of really, really powerful and impactful information. And so, with that in mind, as I had mentioned, so if you are interested and you would like to take the Everything DISC assessment, you can absolutely do. I have a complimentary assessment that I'm happy to administer to you. So, you might have been going through this presentation thinking, I'm not sure where I fall into this. And so, the first tool really to be successful as a leader is to have self-awareness. So if you are curious about your style, again, this is my gift to you. You can either scan the QR code, or I can put the website in the chat. It's freebie. All right. So again, I'll show it a little bit later if you need a reference point to it. I know, I like my little dino, right? Isn't he cute? My little dinosaur. I think he's a little T-Rex. I don't know. It's what Google can produce a QR code. I learned that recently, and so it just gives me a fun little dinosaur. Um, but again, so this is just if you're kind of curious as to where your personality style lies, that you can take our free assessment. It takes about 20 to 30 minutes, and it is the official Everything DISC assessment through Wiley, which is our partner. All right, last few seconds to scan that code or to go onto the website before we move on. All right, so we're gonna scooch over here now. So now we are going to actually try and apply what we're learning. I know, annoying that I make you actually apply what you're learning because I am a trainer at heart. And so this is where we are going to break out into our breakout rooms. Now, please don't all of a sudden have a mass exodus of leaving. It's not going to be that difficult, I promise you, because this is where the learning really happens. All right, so as I am talking, Matt, on the back end, if you can break people out again, let's do groups of about 8, 7 or 8 people, knowing that there might be some people who drop off. All right, so as Matt is getting that prepared and we go into our breakouts, I'm going to ask you to go into your group and have a conversation. So here's the scenario. You've proposed a revised timeline during the team meeting and someone challenges you publicly. And now you feel the tension spike. All right, each of your hypothetical teammates has a different reaction style. So like we said, we've gone through this. One's direct and blunt, one's emotional and people-focused, one avoids tension, and one is skeptical and analytical. So with your group, I'd like you to discuss what's each person likely thinking or feeling in that moment, and how you, as a project manager or a project leader, how you would adjust your response. All right, so again,
Then
this is the scenario. Go ahead.
9 breakout rooms would be 8 to 9 participants per room. Is that okay? Or do we want to go 10 or 11?
Yeah,
Or
that's fine. Nope, that's fine.
9? Okay.
That's fine. Yeah, some of you might end up going into a room. If you're orphaned, if there's no one else that appears in your room, come back to the main room and we can help you out. Okay, so I'm saying, so Francie is asking, so someone, not those 4 people, challenged the PM. Right. So someone challenges you publicly. Someone. But you know that your teammates all have a different reaction. So let's just say it's all like your whole team has worked on this timeline and someone else challenges it. How will people on your team react? All right, any other questions?
And just one admin reminder, if those who are able want to screen cap this, because you won't see it when you're in the actual breakout room. So
Yep, so someone, you might want to take a screenshot. All right, take a screenshot real quick. So we're going to give you about 7 or 8 minutes to have this conversation internally. And then we'll come back and discuss it. So again, overall context is you and your team have worked on this timeline very closely. You've worked together. someone challenges it. How are each of these individuals going to respond? And how would you adjust your response to each of those individuals? All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing.
Okay.
And then
Everybody should be
Matt
notified about the
here.
breakout room here in a second.
Right.
And Kate, were you going to join one or were you just going to kind of?
I'm going to
Okay.
hang out.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, welcome back. Oh, look at those smiling faces. So nice to see everybody. All right, I think we've got most people back. So let's just chat a little bit about how that went. So feel free to unmute yourself. I would love to just hear. So throw in a questioning out there. So which one was the easiest? Which one did you feel was the easiest to address? I think that'll really depend on the person who answers.
I think we're asking for an extension of the deadline here so we can have more time to go over the slides. We got about maybe a quarter of the way through the discussion and we're called
Okay.
back. So
Okay.
We got cut off in mid-sentence as well.
That's what's tricky about Zoom. It just cuts you off, right? It's like the D or the dominant side, the dominant world. Um, all right. So someone was saying, gave us too much freedom to socialize. Now we don't want to go back to silence. So don't go back to silence. Let's talk. I know. I really wanted an opportunity for everyone to get a chance to talk it through. Um, what would you do differently if you were the project manager? How would you, let's put it a different way. How would you have modified, or what would you have done to address some of these concerns?
Well, we said in our group that we would make sure we explain the reason for the change. Um, Maybe the person that's making the schedule change is the CEO of the company, and he's, or she is interacting with the stakeholders and knows things that the other folks in the room might not. So, and we talked about how, someone who was direct and blunt might slam their laptop and commit career suicide by slamming their laptop in front of the CEO. But I think definitely explaining the reason for the change and talking that through with the team and making sure that logic is solid.
Okay, thank you. Catherine.
Okay, so I'm just going to respond. Actually, this is how I've done this in the past because deadlines can both be extended and shortened, and they're equally risky because extending deadlines can present a completely different set of risks that you may not have thought about in your initial risk management. Um, but my personal tendency is to become extremely analytical, and I have almost invariably tried to guide conversations and people's reactions back into okay, but we still have to do the work. What are the new opportunities and risks presented, and how can we problem solve around those most effectively given the environment we have? That does not go over well with everybody all the time, and I've frequently found that you need to sort of let people vent a little bit first, but then bring them back to we still have work to do, guys, and so let's talk about how we're going to get it done. And I do find that I've been successful using, well, what are the risks and opportunities that these new constraints provide?
Mm-hmm.
So,
That's a great way to frame it. And you're also then putting it back to asking the group, right? What are some of these risks that, or the opportunities that we can have? Giving people space to vent. You might not be a person who's overly comfortable with people talking about feelings. That doesn't mean that people shouldn't be allowed to talk about it. It does mean that you can put a cap on it, right? Okay, I'm going to give you a 3 minutes for everyone to just air out all their grievances. And then when that 3-minute alarm goes up, we're done, we're moving on. Right? So I used to work with someone who had a sign that said no drama zone. And if people were getting too emotional, they would just start pointing like that in the middle of a meeting. Like, no drama zone. Okay, let's tone it back down, right? Letting people kind of go off, have their thoughts, voice their opinions. On the flip side, we need to also present a safe opportunity for people who are a little bit more quiet or might not be the first ones to vocalize things. We need to give them some space to talk to. And so that might mean something like asking for each person to, you got a minute on the floor, right? So those that need to vent can get it out. Those that need to process it can have an opportunity to do so. And you're making sure that other people are feeling welcomed. All right. Catherine says, I have held offsite time boxed cheese and wine sessions. There you go. I like that. Like, okay, we're going to have a 5-minute wine and cheese session, no alcohol involved. So go ahead and wine all you want, and then we're going to move on. All right, Sydney.
Hi. This is also a pretty recent part of my job. Dealt with a lot of timeline changes and schedule adjustments and just overall project, oh crap, we're doing it this way now kind of decisions. But when I was rebuilding timelines, and that was my role to do that, nothing that I put forward as the new timeline was solidified until we had the team meeting. So, in all of our discussions about timelines, there was still room to make adjustments to it right up until that meeting ended. And I never really had to deal with a whole lot of pushback or conflict on the timeline that wasn't constructive and then used to make it better. Like the analytic person, the emotional, like other people focused person, like they have really good insights that you can pull into the final version of whatever you're adjusting. And giving everyone on the team that chance to contribute and be part of that decision means that they're way more likely to buy in and give constructive feedback rather than feeling like they're now being tasked to do something different.
Absolutely. And that really ties into empowering people. And I like what you're saying is about building in that time for feedback. Not everyone likes to respond right away. Some people need a little bit of time to process it. They want to go back, they want to look at it, they kind of need to play around with it, see how it impacts and intersects other things, and then they come back and can share that with you. So we don't always have that luxury, but when we do, giving a little bit of time for feedback on as we're approaching major milestones, or as we are, planning things out, that is a great opportunity to try and build in a little bit of that buffer time for feedback from the group. What else? What other thoughts or reactions, or what did you talk about within your groups?
And also, to add to what she just said, sometimes the people doing the job are the expert in that field or whatever they do. So we might create a timeline, but them being the expert, they know exactly what goes into what they're doing. So there should always be a room when creating those timelines and having them, be involved in it and owning the project, basically. They're not just being told what to do, but they're owning it. And I feel like they'll be able to stick to it and complete it because they feel like they were part of putting it together. I feel like maybe the owner or the CEO may have to be, hey, I will have to revisit this timeline again because I have to put it in front of the team and see you know, what's best and stuff. Because they can catch the risk more than me as the project manager because they're the expert in their
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so many power dynamics come into play in these types of situations. And you've got stakeholders, and then you've got CEOs, and then you've got vendors, and many times they're all conflicting with one another. I'm in the midst right now of a project that's gone completely off the rails. and we're trying to get it back in, but it kind of interesting side note, it's a group I've worked with for about 7 years, and our project manager is just fantastic. She keeps everyone on track, etc. Well, she had a family emergency and had to step away for the past few days, and the entire project is like no one knows what to do, right? Because she was the one that, she had all her roles and everything defined. And so we're all sort of scrambling. In fact, that's my next meeting from here is to go back and figure out who's going to step in her place. And primarily it's to who's going to communicate with the stakeholder about we're going to have to modify the timeline a bit. What can we do internally? And we're trying to have a group conversation, right? Rather than someone just stepping in and saying, you do this, you do this, you do this. We're going to do a 30-minute meeting where we brainstorm who's going to split out what, how are we going to phrase this and present this to the client? How will we mitigate risks internally? Where do they need to be alerted of this, et cetera? So people feel much better and respond much better to things when there is a collaborative component to that. That doesn't always work in our worlds. We don't always have the time or the interest or the patience to talk through everything. When that comes into play, then we get conflict. So what are some ways that you would be able to manage this as a project manager? Let's say there was some internal conflict within your team when you are working through this scenario. What are some different ways that you as a project manager could handle that?
Read that question. I'll
Sometimes you
take
just,
notes.
I mean,
Sorry.
sometimes you just have to call a vote and say, hey, look, you two are fighting. You want this, they want that. We're not going to come to a resolution with your heads butting, and put it to a vote of the greater team and say, and just poll everybody and try to get consensus. And then if you can't, somebody's going to have to raise their hand and just, dictate what the answer is going to be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right, Karen's saying talk to people individually in case some don't want to speak up in front of the group. Right. There is a fantastic book. Karen mentioned that I love books and I have on my YouTube channel, I have some book reviews. There's a really powerful book called Quiet, and it's by Susan Cain. I see a lot of nodding, right? And it's about the power of introverts. And one of the biggest things I took away from that book was that as a society, we have a tendency to think that the people who talk the most are the smartest in the room, but that's not necessarily the truth. And when we are in a situation where there's some conflict or we need to make a decision quickly, sometimes we end up going with the loudest voice in the room, and that's not always the best decision. Sometimes we do it to pacify them. Sometimes we do it because they just have convinced us. But when we leverage our introverts, when we leverage and make sure that all the people on the team or different perspectives are shared with us, that's when we can become a very powerful and productive team. The loudest person is not always the smartest. I see lots of comments coming in there, but I had someone raise their hand. Did I see them? No? Okay. Janet is saying, okay, so let's see, take it up a level. I think team retros are a great way to make folks feel heard, and I'm adjusting my style to what works for the team. Right, jumping in and having a chance, okay, what worked really well? What can we do to move forward? Great opportunity. Try to focus on the commonalities, so your goals, benefits rather than differences. Right. So when people are having conflict, bringing them back to the mission of the organization. Shocking how many of us forget why we're at work in the first place and what we're doing. Some of you are much more mission-driven organizations than others. Tying it back to strategic goals. Does this align with the strategic goal of the organization or of our group, right? So kind of bringing it back to lots of different emotions, lots of different thoughts and opinions, but we need to baseline here. And what are we really doing? What's our mission? What's our vision? What are our strategic goals? How does this align with them? How is this going to get us to the next level? All right, someone says, how do you draw them out in a hurry? All right, and Amelia says, I'm a fan of whiteboarding session and calling on people if necessary. So that is a fantastic idea. You can virtually whiteboard, you can whiteboard in person. The thing that I think is really helpful is giving, especially our introverts, giving them a chance to say, I'm going to call on everybody. I'd like everyone to have a few minutes to say something. I'm going to start with so-and-so, and then I'm going to move on to X, Y, and Z, right? So giving them a little bit of a heads up, but putting a time constraint around it can be a good way to get people to say thing in a hurry. Some other solutions I've seen is sometimes I do rapid brainstorming on Post-it notes, which is kind of like your whiteboarding. Write a different idea. Each Post-it note you write a different idea on. And then we're going to look and see where we have the most commonality. If you get a little bit of chance, you can do that. What are some other ways? Let's help out Janet here. How do you draw out people in a hurry? Amelia.
Somebody mentioned something recently, which I thought was brilliant, which is having a bad idea session. And this is the same thing as a brainstorm, but it just gives people a little more freedom to not immediately have the right answer and get a little bit more creative as a result. So if you set that expectation that we're going to spend, 3 minutes on bad ideas, sometimes that can sort of open the floodgates.
Yeah, that's actually, there's a learning theory that does just that. And it talks about envisioning the worst meeting you've ever had, the worst project you've ever worked on, the most ineffective stakeholder you've ever managed, right? As a society, we try and shift towards positive thinking, but it actually can foster a lot of creativity because through that, you're actually shaping what your ideal project is because you're saying this is the worst, this is the extreme. So because of that, this is what we really want. So it's a different way of creative brainstorming. I also see the pre and post mortem, very effective. Again, you could ask everyone to write something. You could go around the room, make sure you take notes. People could add it to a whiteboard. Lots of different ways to get people's insight and opinion. All right, any other comments as we wrap this up? All right, we got just a few more. Laying the groundwork for psychological safety is essential to being able to draw people out later. Absolutely. Amy Edmonston is the sort of foremost expert on psychological safety. She's got a couple books out. So if you want more information about that, she is an excellent resource. Let me go back to, I got a couple more slides for us. All right, we're going to go back to this. So as we are wrapping up, all right, so just a couple more things to say about this. So I had referenced towards the beginning that, change has an impact on conflict or it influences conflict. So we think about it kind of like a domino effect, right? We have change that happens, people feel uncertain, then they are emotionally triggered. And then that's where we get that conflict response. So if we see, let's say, oh, I don't know, a presidential order comes out and we suddenly have to let go of several people within an organization. So that's change. How do people feel? They're feeling uncertain. They don't know what position they are. They don't know if their position will be retained. Then they're feeling emotional. So what do? Maybe they start holding that information close to hand because information is power. And if I don't share it with other people and I'm the only one who knows it, then no one can get rid of me, right? No one can let me go because I have that information. And so as a conflict response, I can withdraw. Or maybe I act like I'm better than other people. Or maybe I start bad talking other people so that the information or the attention goes towards them, right? So that's a pretty extreme case. Let's think about it in terms of if you got some people on your team that are changing. All of a sudden, one person leaves or someone gets promoted, a new member comes in. There's change now. The dynamics on that team have changed. People are feeling a little uncertain. Maybe you knew their reputation in advance. Maybe you didn't know anything about them. So how do you react? Maybe you're willing to bring them in and mentor them. Maybe you are not happy they're on their team. And so you, again, hoard some of that information. Maybe they're a really loud dynamo person and the dynamics of your team are all shifted now. You start to withdraw or you start to have a negative response, right? So I want you to be aware that we are going through a massive amount of change right now as a society in the United States. Many of us that are working with and for government, there's a lot of change going on. With that change comes conflict. So be aware of some of those subtle cues of your team. Be aware of their behaviors. Do what you can to open up the lines of communication. Because remember, we talked about AI doesn't have emotions, but humans do. And for at least the time being, for a while now, we're going to still have a human component of the work that we do. All right, so just something to kind of think about as we're wrapping this up. What would shift under pressure and without judgment? So again, the purpose of this whole thing was to not be conflict resolution, but conflict recognition. How do we recognize how people react, how you react? What would shift on your team if you could start putting a name to it, getting your team to articulate how they're feeling? How would it work in your family if you have children or a significant other, right? How would that shift if people could start naming how they're reacting and we didn't pass judgment on it? Makes us more effective as an individual, makes us more productive as a team. And with that, we're going to wrap it up. Again, if you're interested and you'd like to have a complimentary everything DISC assessment, go ahead and scan this QR code with my little dinosaur or go to mountvernonconsulting.com/DISC freebie, and we would be happy to send you over a complimentary assessment. Here's my contact information. Go ahead and follow me on LinkedIn. Karen referenced our website, so thank you for going to it, Karen. We are actually, we just acquired another leadership development company. So we are going through lots of change ourselves at Mount Vernon Consulting. And so our website is being developed on the back end and should be live in the next, hopefully the next 15 to 20 days. So that'll be a whole web of resource for you as well. All right, thank you so much, everybody. I'll go ahead, Matt.
Yep.
Do what you need to do.
I actually had a question for the entrepreneurs in the room or the people who are thinking about being entrepreneurs or may have been in the past. How do you know when it makes more sense, like to acquire like another leadership development company or solution that does things that you don't, or build it in house? Like, so how do you measure doing it yourself versus investing in somebody else that does it better today?
Are you talking about from an entrepreneur perspective or from a business perspective?
I was asking from an entrepreneur, but if you want to look at it from a business one, that's fine too.
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple things is that if there's time and resources in-house to commit to doing leadership development, then sure, keep it in-house. The challenge is doing it well And again, having the time and resources to do it. It's like everyone loves mentoring programs. They say, oh, let's do these mentoring programs, but the maintenance behind it is so cumbersome that it either falls apart or they end up outsourcing it. So I think a lot of it kind of comes to, from an entrepreneurial perspective, it's more about where is your niche market? What are your core offerings? And for us, it made sense because we're continuing to grow and evolve. It made sense for us to acquire this leadership development company. Because that's my wheelhouse, right? If it was something that's not really the type of product and service line we offer, then I'd have to think really strategically about, is this really what's going to serve my customers or expand my customer base? It's kind of a really quick answer, but I'm happy to talk to you offline about it because going through an acquisition has been a very interesting experience.
I'm sure. Okay. Well, thank you again so much for all the time, energy, and seeds planted today. And we look forward to our continued partnership.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much. And I realized something. My social media manager asked me to get a picture, and I did not get one. So if anyone would mind just smiling, I can grab a picture, a screenshot picture. If you want to come off screen, anyone that's still around. Oh, look at that. Oh, I love it. Okay, look at all this. Okay, and then we'll show that we still have 73%. Oh, you guys, Rachel, my new social media director, is going to be so excited. All right. Let's do this. On the count of three, I'll say three, and then we'll all look really nice and wave and say, I love conflict, right? Okay. 1, 2, 3.
I love conflict.
All right. Thanks again, everyone. I really, really appreciate it. Have an enjoyable rest of your session. I know Matt's coming up next. John Reardon, who's coming in the afternoon, I don't know if you guys heard me say earlier, is a very near and dear friend. He's in Uganda right now. He and I have known each other for almost 20 years and worked together very closely. You are in for a treat. He is such a fun presenter and such a dynamo, and you're going to just get so much out of it. I might actually pop on for a little bit just to see him. So thanks again, everybody. I really, really appreciate the opportunity, and I hope I see you around.
Great. So by a show of hands, who would be interested in a